Let's go. Let's go.
Amazing. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Business of Sound. My name is David Segura, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Glassbox Media, and obviously the host of this podcast. As always, we're trying to bring you incredible information about the podcast industry that should make you better, whether you're a podcast executive, a creator, or frankly, someone that just wants to learn more. As always, we work really hard to bring you exclusive interviews with amazing talent, producers, you name it, and we really hope you'll enjoy the show. Today, I'm actually very excited because we have an awesome interview with Rodney Richard, better known as Don Vito, both media and music mogul. And what I really want to talk about today, just throw it out there, Don Vito, is that your background is amazing. You worked with incredible artists like TI, Ciara, Young Jock, you name it. But you've also done it in TV, and now you're making it big in podcasting. So without further ado, let's just get rolling. Let's get right into it.
Let's
And
get right into it. Let's not waste no time.
all right, let's do it. Yeah. So just starting from the top, I mean, one thing I'm kind of curious about, did some research, did some homework. I saw that you were in the Marines and that you served. What made
Yes.
you decide to jump in to the music industry?
Well, to be honest with you, I had no plans on um, being in the music industry. In fact, although I live in Atlanta, I was born and raised. I like to tell people, like, I was born and raised in Gary, Indiana, but I
Hmm.
grew up in Atlanta. So Gary, Indiana, if you know anything about it, it's a small city. It's about 30 miles from Chicago. So the most information that we receive is Chicago news when it comes to radio, television,
Hmm.
newspaper. And so my first inspiration into music was Dr. Dre, who was a DJ at the time, right? And
Hmm.
so he inspired me to want to be a DJ, but I never thought it could be anything further than that. So,
Hmm.
my biggest aspiration was to be on the radio in Chicago. That was my biggest thing. If I could just get on the radio, DJ in Chicago, that'd be great. But needless to say, it didn't happen. I didn't have the support. And so when going into the Marine Corps, I didn't know what I wanted to do, once I was, discharged, but I knew I wanted to do something. I was destined for something, but I just couldn't figure it out. And so I decided to move to Atlanta because, I had an aunt here and I used to see pictures of the girls and I'd be like, oh man, they got some pretty girls in Atlanta. I'm going to Atlanta. But I didn't, my goal wasn't to be in the music industry. So what happened was my brother was in college at the time and he wanted to be a rapper.
Hmm.
So he'd play his demo tapes for me all the time to get my opinion. I'd be like, man, that sucks. Man, that's horrible. I don't like that. And so one day he was like, but then you make my beats. You make the beats for me then. And I was like, well, I would if I know how to make beats. So what happened was I was like, okay. He convinced my mom to get a drum machine. I started tinkering around with it. And I was like, oh, this is how you do it? Because up until that point, rap music at the time, I had never seen rap music made. I assumed that when people made songs, there was a band in the studio and they were rapping right there on the spot. I didn't know they had machines to create things. So
Yeah.
I got introduced to a friend and he was like, yo, this is how you make beats. This is how you do this. And, it's irony of it was the guy I'm talking about. Well, there was two guys and the guy, Rico Wade, just passed this Saturday.
Oh, wow. Didn't know that that was possible during a live interview, but sorry about that. We'll edit that out.
Right. So Rico Wade, rest in peace. He was one of the people that inspired me and, encouraged me to, that you can do it. And so my first check for music was $100. And I was like, wow, somebody paid me $100 to make some music for them. I was like, well, if I can make $100, I can make $10,000. And if I can make 10,000, I can make 100. So I quit my job. I thought that was it. Well, that's when the struggle began. So that's how my introduction to the music industry came about. Like just being around people. I didn't know what a producer was. And then one day I woke up, like once I quit my job. I woke up. I remember, if you know anything about jobs, I remember the morning I was supposed to get my last check. I woke up out the bed because I really didn't. I was like teetering the fence, like, okay, do I want to produce? And then when I woke up that morning to get my check, I was like, you know what? I'm going to be a producer. That's what I'm going to do. That's what I'm going to be in life. My life's mission is to be a producer. And so that's how I got started. And so I never looked back.
So you really went all in then. That's amazing.
Yeah.
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 Let me ask you a question. I know it's like a little bit of a loaded question. I get some variation of this all the time. I don't really know what the answer is. I'm sure it's different for everyone. Obviously, you worked hard. Obviously, you were given a great opportunity. but part of this was like natural born talent, even if you didn't know at the time that you had it. What do you think the balance is between working your ass off, frankly, and just God given talent?
Um, I think that is a loaded question, and it's a great question, by the way. I think it's talent, but I think it's will over talent. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Because I've been in the industry long enough, and I've seen, and probably you've experienced, whether any industry where somebody is really talented, whether they're a musician,
Sure.
singer, rapper, or an actor, and you wonder like, wow, that person was really talented. Why didn't they make it? Well, I believe that they didn't make it because it's still a certain, you got to be able to stomach it because it's like the belly of
Sure.
Satan. You know what I'm saying? Like the business. See, what happens is super talented people
Hmm.
can't handle the business part of it because it's just a lot of things that go on behind closed doors that some people just, I just want to sing, I just want to rap, I just want to play the keyboards. And when they get to the part when they start stripping that away and then realize it's business, it's too much to stomach
I can
for
see
them.
that.
And so I
And
say will over skill.
okay, will over skill. You know what? I lean into that. I think I definitely agree with that. I think ultimately it's about work ethic and just fighting it out. Everybody's different, can be sensitive or not, but the truth is you got to like gut it out sometimes. And we see that in podcasting. I've seen that in my career in media, so I'm inclined to agree. I guess on that note, I'll put it out there this way. You've had a lot of success. I'm sure there's been way more highs than lows. But nonetheless, when I think about music, I've always been told it's a great business and it's awesome and it's culturally relevant, but it's bruising. It's not easy. And it's tough whether you're an artist or you're a producer. So, as much as you feel comfortable, don't want to put you on the spot. Love to hear about just some of the war stories, for lack of a better term.
Um, I mean, where do you begin with that? It's so many. But if I had to name one, yeah, I'll tell you two. Sometimes artists get what I call damnesia,
Hmm.
right? They forget what really happened during the process, right? So it's like damnesia, right? And so I remember um, working on an artist project. We were in Miami, and I don't care. Blue Cantrell, we were working on her album. Me and Candy wrote the song.
Hmm.
Uh, Literally, Candy and I wrote the song, and then when it came down to the splits and who wrote the song, she swore it down. She wrote the record. I'm like, you weren't even there. We just called you in to record the song, and so she held the record up because until she held the record hostage because at that point she was Blue Cantrell, and it was
Sure.
like, well, if I can't get this, then I'm not going to put the record on the album, and it was the single. Another war story would be there was an artist that I was helping out. He was up and coming. He was trying to find his way. And by
Sure.
this time, I was established, so I thought he was pretty cool. And so he came and said, "Hey man, I want to work with you." So we worked out a couple of things. And I had this record. I was working with a writer at the time.
Hmm.
Actually, you know him now as Dream, the Dream, right? But he and I worked every day, right? And so we had wrote this record called Champion, and he demoed up the song.
Hmm.
And so when he demoed up the song, I was like, okay, this is cool, Champion, right? But I didn't really have a placement. So this guy was in the studio. I was like, he was like, man, he pleaded with, man, let me just put my verse on there. Come on, man, please. I was like, all right, man, record it. But I still needed to see how the record was going to sound anyway with a verse on it. So he
Sure.
did the verses. I gave him a CD of it, let him, live with it. But I still didn't have a place for it. So a couple of months later, I run into Jeezy. And he's like, man, listen, I need a singer for my record. I said, oh, say less. I got the record. It just clicked in my head.
Yeah.
Um, Champion, right? And I was like, yo, as a matter of fact, we need to put Rihanna on it. He was like, yeah. He heard it. He was like, yeah, let's put Rihanna on it. So we arranging to put Rihanna on the song. It's going to be a single. Record's going to be a smash. This guy finds out about it, so he leaks the record.
Really? Damn.
So I couldn't. So now it's like you didn't messed up the record because like, well, I don't want no record that somebody else had. So that was a disaster. Like that really, it was a learning lesson for what I'm
Yeah.
saying. I mean, I can keep going on stories and stories, stories. It's like you right there, and then something happens every time.
Yeah.
But you
I
got to
can
keep
only imagine. Yeah.
pushing through. You got to just keep pushing through. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Don't look in the rearview mirror is what I say.
I hear that. And then before we jump into podcasting too, because I know like a lot of this is commingled. That's how people's careers are in media. But it seemed also like you made a transition or started getting more active in the TV industry with variety shows. Yeah, and it seems like you have a great relationship with Bravo. Would love to hear how those opportunities came about.
Actually, that ties in with podcasting, right? So Candy Burris is a good friend of mine, and like I said, she and I used to write songs together. So she
Hmm.
transitioned into no, she transitioned. So I'm gonna have to tie the story in, right? So this is how the TV part came in, because
Share that.
I had a camera. People knew me. I used to walk around with a camera all the time, but I didn't
Mhm.
really have a direction. I used to just capture footage, right? And so one day in 2007, 2008, Candy called me on the phone. She's like, "Hey man, I got this idea for this show. Me and my friends doing this show. It's called live streaming. Have you ever heard of live streaming?" I was like, "Nah, what is that?" So she started explaining to me. She's like, "So you technical, you got the cameras, you know how to do this stuff. Help me." And so I'm the type of person that if I'm not going to do nothing if I can't commit to do it, right?
Right.
If you and I, David, agreed to work on something, then I'm going to commit to. I'm not going to agree until I see how I can commit to it and how I can make it better, or add value to it, and then you'll quit before me. Will Smith has a saying. If both of us are on the treadmill, either one or two things are going to happen. You're going to quit, or I'm going to die, and that's how I look at it. So anyway, she gave me the idea. I saw it. I was like, oh, this is cool. I like this idea. Candy Coated Nights online sex show.
Hmm.
So I started realizing, start organizing it, structuring, putting the right format, and the show ended up being a success. So that was my first taste of podcasting. It was called live streaming at the time. The only difference really between a podcast and a live stream is live. A podcast is a lot of times
Yeah.
pre-recorded, whereas a live stream is the same concept, but um, once you mess up, that's what it is.
I was
It's
gonna
just on the
say
internet.
it sounds
It's
the
on the
same
internet.
but harder. Yeah.
Right. And so that's how the transition into the once I started seeing like, wow, okay, this is the same thing as making a song. Like TV is the same concept as making a song. Like you go in the studio, you pick the artist, and so once I started correlating that, uh, that happened, and so now we go into TV because so now Ken and I got this hot online sex show. I'm not the host, of course. I like to be behind the camera, but she's the host along with three other people. And so she calls me one day and she says, "Hey, um, I was at a bar. Okay, that's my disclaimer.
Hmm.
So and, I was under the influence. I would just say that. And so she was calling me on the phone. She was telling me, "Yeah, I got this idea about this song. Have you ever heard of Kim Zolciak?" I was like, "Nah, I've never heard of Kim Zolciak." She's like, "You don't watch Real Housewives of Atlanta?" I said, "Absolutely not. I do not watch Real Housewives of Atlanta." And so she was like, "Well, yeah, she was on there. She was with Dallas Austin, who was a huge producer in the game. And they tried to make a song, and it turned out horrible. And she made him look bad. I said, "Well, why are you calling me? I don't mean don't make me look bad." She's like, "No, no, no." So as she kept talking, and the libation started kicking in, I started
Yeah.
saying, "Listen to what she said." So she started telling me about the song, and I got this song called "Tardy for the Party," and she started humming it. So I said, "Hold on." So I walked out the bar. I said, "Say it again. Say it to me again." So she started humming the melody to me, and she had a little like a verse idea, and I was like,
Sure.
"Oh, okay." Now at this time, house music was the thing.
Yeah.
So I was like, "Okay, cool." So I said, "Well, what I hear is a house type beat." She's like, "Okay." So I started beatboxing, and she started singing it. I was like, "Okay, cool. I see it." Bam. I said, I'm gonna hang up my cell phone, call back, leave it, sing it on my voicemail." She called back, sang it on my voicemail, and I took the voicemail, put it inside of Pro Tools, and that's how I created "Target for the Party."
Really? Wow. Jeez. That's
And
amazing.
so she called me back. She's like, "Hey, they like the song." Now this is about a month and a half later. I was like, "Who? What song?" She's like, "The Target for the Party record. They want you to come on TV and record it." I was like, "I'm not coming on no TV on no Real Housewives. Y'all making me back look bad." She's like, "No, no, no. You're gonna go in the studio, and then they want to see how you produce. You and I produce Kim." That's how we produced Target for the Party. It ended up being a success. So then I told Kenny one day, I was like, "Kenny, dang, we took somebody that cannot sing and then made them hot." I said, "We can make anybody hot if that's the case." She said, "Oh, yeah." The next thing I know, she took the idea, packaged it real nice in a bow, took the idea to Bravo, and she called me back and said, "Hey, man, oh, it says I'm disconnected."
Yeah, I'm getting a warning that my internet connection is unstable. 1 second, let me just ask these guys real quick. Luke, do you know if the internet is okay? Okay. Like I said, hopefully, we can edit that out. But just
That's
on a
fine.
side note,
I can pick right back up.
all right. On a side note, though, this office, like it's ironic because we're a podcasting company. The internet here is a lot worse than at my house, so I'm doing it in the office today. But
Right.
note to self: make sure to do it at home. But anyways, you were saying that you were getting ready to go on the show.
Yeah. So, so she came back and packaged it in a bow, and basically, I said to her, "Candy, look, if we can make Kim Zolciak hot, somebody that absolutely has no talent and cannot sing, we can make anybody hot." She's like, "Yeah, we could." We laughed and joked about it. And then she came back and said, "Hey, look, I done already packaged it, made it look, put it in a bow,
Mm-hmm.
and I've already sold the idea to Bravo." What? So we're gonna do a show called Candy, the Candy Factory, and where we're gonna take these artists and we're gonna develop them on camera. We're gonna write a song, teach them how to choreograph some moves, style them, and then make them compete. And then that's how my relationship with Bravo began with that show, The Candy Factory.
That's amazing. Wow. It's kind of crazy how things come together. It's almost like they're supposed to happen. You have to
Yeah.
work hard. You got to be open to new ideas, but you make it happen. So with that in mind, I can already see how your relationships in music and your talent got you into live streaming, which is, pretty similar to podcasting. But let's jump ahead now. You're running a new company. You're also obviously an authoritative producer, and your skill set really kind of translates to multiple industries. But why did you decide to make a bigger leap into podcasting? And also, I know it's a lot of questions, but tell us also more about your current company.
Right. Okay. So the reason I decided to make the leap into podcasting was really I saw the opportunity. I saw it as being huge, right?
Mhm.
And it was just like media at that point because it was a combination of video and audio together, and I was like, this is the future. And so when I got the Candy Coated Nights, once that was successful, I still was trying to figure it out. I didn't know how to monetize it. I know how to grow an audience, so what, by leveraging certain people and certain things, but I didn't know how to monetize it. And so enters this guy Ash Cash.
Mhm.
Ash Cash was a guy I was following on Instagram, but
Mhm.
I assumed he lived in New York, so I didn't know he lived in Atlanta at the time. So I would follow him because he would do these inspirational quotes and stuff. I was like, "Oh, that's pretty cool. I'd like to meet him."
Mhm.
That was it. About a couple of months later, maybe the beginning of 2000 and the end of 2019, 2020, my friend asked me to come to an event, and I was like, "Oh, okay," but I really didn't want to go. But I was like, "All right, man, I'm gonna come for support." He was like, "You ever heard of Earn Your Leisure?" I was like, "Nah, who are they?" He was like, "I'm telling you, they're huge in the financial literacy space. So just come back, man. Just come back." I was like, "All right, cool." So I go to the event, but David, all while I'm sitting at the event, I'm in the car before I go on the event trying to make up a lie to why I had to leave, right? Because I didn't really want to be there. So I was like, I'm just gonna go in there and I'm getting out. What lie can I tell? But as I'm
Mhm.
sitting in the car and I come up with my grand scheme,
Mhm.
I'm getting ready to go pay for parking, and then I see the statue of a person. I'm like, dang, that looked like the Ash Cash guy right there. And as I got closer, I was like, that is Ash Cash. I gotta think quick. So as I approached him, I said, "Hey, what's up? You Ash Cash?" He's like, "Yeah." I was like, "Man, my name is Don Vito, man. I produce podcasts, man. Man, I got a great idea for you, man, for a podcast." He's like, "Really?" I didn't have no idea, David. I just didn't think I had an idea, right? He's like, I was like, "Man, I love to sit down and meet with you and talk to you about it." He said, "Man, you know what? This is good timing because I'm looking to do a podcast." I
Mhm.
said, "Okay, cool, man." We exchanged numbers, and he said, "Well, I'm about to go on this event. Where you headed?" I said, "I'm going to that event." He's like, "Really? I'll see you in there." So I had to get in there before he did. So when I got in there, I went to where my guy was where the guy who was actually my friend who invited me
Mhm.
he had the camera crew. So I went and stood next to him and started pointing my hand like I was the director. So when Ash Cat see me, it looked like this is my set and I'm the director.
Yeah.
So then Ash came and said, "Hey man," he stood on this side. He's like, "Hey man, this your stuff?" I was like, "Yeah, this my stuff right here." And so I said, hey, French, my guy, I said, hey, man, listen, this Ash Cash, he got a large following on social media, man. We going to work with this guy. I got a podcast idea. Hey, Ash, meet my partner, French. French, meet Ash. All right, cool. Let's schedule time. We scheduled time. We met. We came up with the idea Inside the Vault, which is a huge, widely successful podcast. That was my indoctrination into the podcast thing. Like, that's when I first officially said, wait a minute, this is what I'm doing. Podcasting, like, because a lot of times some people teeter on the fence or have one foot in, one foot out.
Yeah.
If you're gonna be God, you got to be God all the way. If you in, you got to be in.
I like it.
I don't like to straddle the fence on when I commit to something. I'm committed.
I hear that. And I guess another question I had too is that obviously you're active in this space. You're producing content. But one thing I was kind of curious about too is how do creators get in contact with you? Like, let's say they have a great idea for their own podcast, or they need help on production, coaching, you name it. What is the best way for maybe some of our listeners, for example, to reach out directly to you?
Man, that's a great question, David. You first of all, I don't know if anybody ever told you, you really know how to ask really, really great questions. They're not just mundane questions. But to answer that, they can hit me on my Instagram and just send me a DM. I am Don Vito XL. D is in Delta, O is in Oscar, N is in Nancy, V is in Victory, I is in Ice Cream, T is in Tom, O is in Oscar, X is in X-Ray, L is in Lemon. That's my Instagram. Send me a DM. Say, hey, listen, I want you to produce my podcast, or I need help. We're actually at Digital Citizens, we're building out a community for podcasters and people who want to learn entrepreneurs, business owners, marketers. So a space where you can come and get all types of insight, access, recognition, rewards for all things media, whether it's starting a podcast, growing a podcast, monetizing a podcast, how to build an online community.
Okay.
Those are what we niche down on. So that's what we specialize in, digital media.
Very cool. So there's basically, the community itself, but maybe lessons or content people can pay for or access. Is that how it works?
Yeah, so we have a course on there called the 7-Figure Podcast Game Plan. It's soups and nuts on everything from buying the equipment, the right lighting, which cameras, how to set up a community, how to grow your audience. I'm just thinking of some stuff in there. It just covers everything in there. Then there's another course on how to build an online community, because I just think that's so key. The online community. And I think that's what separates us digital citizens apart from most, is because, and I know you didn't ask me this question, but I'm just going to dive right into it. I hope you don't mind.
Oh,
A
I'd
lot
love
of
to hear
times
it.
I run into people that ask me about podcasting, or how to start a podcast. But what I've noticed is the common thread is most people want to start a podcast. They don't know what all goes into a podcast. But then once they get started, it's all right, how do I grow my audience? And mainly, equally, if not more important, is how do I make money from this thing? Because a lot of people think from podcasting, even us, right? When I first did Inside the Vault, and I've since produced 5 podcasts. I got 5 podcasts in production, 6 communities that I produce, right? Or we produce at the company. And so, even with Inside the Vault, we had this grand thing. Oh man, we're about to make a lot of money with this because we got this audience and I'm bringing celebrities on. And our first check was $850 after a year. $850. And I remember AshCast said, man, I can't make a living off of $850. So we had to figure out something quick, because most times people think that they're going to make money off the views of from YouTube videos, and then the audio downloads, through Spotify, Apple, and Castbox, and whatever. That money is few and far between. So what we figured out is the absolute fastest way to grow to start monetizing your podcast in less than 45 to 60 days is to attach it to a community, because your podcast is already your platform where you're establishing your voice or yourself as an authority on a subject, right? But the people that are coming there need more from you. They want more from you, actually. But most of the time we don't ask them, we don't do a call to action to ask them to do anything else but watch my YouTube video. You know what I mean? But actually you're in a space, so you don't really need thousands of people. Think about it. You got a community online community, David, I don't know if you do or not, but just think about this. You got an online community and you're providing value. Like, so your podcast, your YouTube, and your audio is where you a long form piece of content where you get to really talk at length to establish value on a subject and establish you as an expert, right?
Sure.
Then your call to action is if you want more information like this, join my community. Or at the link below, you can say you can provide a service there. I just like that all roads to lead to the community. The community is
Sure.
the center of it. But
Huh.
think about
Makes sense.
this. You got a podcast, you got 100 people view it, and you invite them to your community where you have a monthly subscription of $99 a month or whatever your pricing model is. I see
Sure.
the good sweet spot is $99. But
Mhm.
$99 a month, you get 20 people in there, 10 people. That's $1,000, $2,000 monthly recurring revenue. So now you've taken your podcast from zero, waiting on your YouTube view money, right? To you got 20 people in there. Well, that's $24,000 in a year, right?
Sure. Sure.
And then all of a sudden the fuel becomes the man, I need to kick more people into my my community. But inside of that community, it is the center of your universe, right? Because inside of there, you can sell your coaching or your consulting or your mentorship or your coaching or your affiliate or merchandise. And
Mhm.
those people speak your language as
Mhm.
as opposed to Instagram, Facebook, which are not bad platforms. Of course, they're not, right? I like to look at those like bullhorns, right? Those are where
Sure.
you do short form pieces of content. You're trailing the most exciting things to establish, to short. Then
Sure.
YouTube is long, but then you don't know on Instagram or none of those channels really. You don't have enough data points. You don't know who they are, where they live. You don't have a way to contact them directly, no phone number. You don't really know if they speak your language. You don't know if they're part of your tribe. You don't know nothing. But inside of your community, that is your tribe. And you got so
Mhm.
many data points, whether it's their phone number, their email address, the city that they live in, their full name, their hobbies. Those are the data points. And so that's why we figured our niche is always connecting a community to a podcast.
That inspires me to actually take that even more seriously. Because, for example, not to hijack the convo, but at Glassbox, we're working with creators that typically have audio downloads of 200,000 or more. Somewhere between 200,000 and 2 million. And some of them have built really nice communities, and we've helped them build premium subscription services to build on that, but not as much as we should. We very much like the advertising model, and that's fine. But at the end of the day, too, people have been telling us things like that, that you really got to leverage the community, the super fans, the people that just absolutely love the show. It's not going to be all the listeners, for example, but it's going to be a lot. And I think there's something more we could be doing there. So that's really awesome that you've been able to work with talent to do it at the very start of their creative arc, because most of the folks I'm talking about, they've been doing it for years and it's almost like an afterthought. So that's also an opportunity, but it's awesome that you're able to help people do it right away.
Yes, I appreciate that. Yeah. So, well, we didn't start off with the community, you know what I'm saying? But once it clicked in my head, I was like, oh no, it don't even make sense to me to have a podcast without attaching a community to it because, you know, I tell people a lot of times, one of the mistakes podcasters or people that are looking to start a podcast or existing podcasts make is it's a business. You got to think of it, it's a
Mhm.
business, and you're building a business around the podcast or the podcast around a business, right?
Mhm.
Whether it's your coaching and consulting or whether it's a merchandise, like you're establishing yourself as an authority or an expert on a subject, and people will buy into it. But a lot of times we don't have nothing else to sell them or
Sure.
don't even ask them to purchase something, but they'll buy. And if they don't buy from you, they're gonna buy from somebody else.
Hmm. Makes perfect sense. Yeah. One thing I want to say, just kind of in closing, is just kind of like, turn it back to you, just to like, this industry is always changing. Podcasting, that's a one constant here. What do you think people should be really looking towards capitalizing, whether they're an established creator or a beginner? What industry trend do you think is most important to jump on?
I need a little bit more clarification on when you say industry trend. What do you mean?
Basically, what do you think is the single biggest, trend, maybe that's going to change podcasting that people need to get on top of. So for example, for a lot of people, I'll tell you right now, our listeners are going to be like blown away by your comments on community. That's probably going to inspire a lot of people to take it, more seriously. But is there any other trend or any other change that you think is like happening or may happen that could impact people either positively or negatively?
I think podcast and community is the future.
Mm-hmm.
Those two things, like because I look at other ways of monetizing a podcast. I mean, there's several ways. I mean, you can do advertising
Sure.
sponsorship, you can do affiliate marketing, you can do, of course, the money from the views and the downloads, you can do, sell a service. But here's the thing: when you bring in, so David has an audience, right? And so he invited Don Vito to his audience.
Mm-hmm.
But David's audience trusts him. So because David's audience trusts him, he's validated me with his audience, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? But
Pretty
then
much, yeah.
now Coke wants to run an ad on your show. But really Coke takes they dictate at that point, right? Like, because now you're introducing a third party to your
Mm-hmm.
audience. And so now the trust may be fickle, but the community, it's a tribe, it's internal, it's the people that are speaking your language. And imagine if you had the data points, right? Because you don't have to leave, right? And so if you have the data points, you know that, say for instance, if you had 100 people in your community and 30% of those people out of that 100 are in, let's just say Philly, and 20% are in Dallas, and 5% are Oregon. Well, because you have that data, you at that time, or a person at that time, could say, well, if I know that 30% of my people of the people that are in my tribe or inside of my community are in Philly, why don't I just go to Philly and do an event? Rent out a space, do an event, sell merch, do a
Mm-hmm.
podcast, live podcast. It's a networking event on the bar,
Sure.
because you got the data. And guess what? They'll invite a friend, and now you're growing out your community. And there's just so many ways that we know now how to rapidly grow a community. Well, actually, we have, it's called rags to riches, and that's an acronym, rags, that stands for Rapid Audience Growth Strategy.
Oh, wow. I like that. It's more memorable. People take it even more seriously if they understand it and it's memorable. So it's cool. All right. So I think that makes sense. I think that's something that I think a lot of our listeners should be able to learn from, whether they're actively, creating and producing their own podcast, or if there's someone like me trying to run a startup, try to scale it and try to figure out like what's next or what am I missing. And this is definitely something that, like, got to be candid, that we've talked about, but haven't really capitalized on. So I like the fact that you're organizing it in a way that's pretty actionable. Like, you can teach people, but at the same time too, it helps them go out and do it for themselves. And that's awesome.
Yeah, that's the saying is, if you can feed a person a fish and they'll eat for a day, but if you teach them how to fish, they'll eat for life. I want to
There
teach
you
you how to
go.
fish. I'm going to teach you how to fish, David. I'm going to teach you how to fish. What you like?
Love
Red
the
snapper, perch, ocean perch? I'm messing with you.
love the attitude. Love the philosophy. So, Don Vito, want to thank you again for being on the Business of Sound. I really think our listeners are going to get a lot out of this. So thank you again for your time. And thank you also for putting up with some of the technical difficulties that we had before the call started.
Hey, listen, I appreciate you. I literally call this the Boss Podcast, the Boss, which is an acronym for Business of Sound. It's the Boss Podcast, all bosses.
There we go. I like it. It's another way to brand it.
Yeah.
And so thank you, listeners, for being with us today. If you like what you hear, you like listening to the past episodes, please consider us leaving a 5-star review. Makes it a little bit easier to discover the podcast. But as always, thank you from everyone here at the Business of Sound.
Thank you.